Day. Thank you, Rockstar. Excited now.
Normandy, UK Armed Forces are performing a parachute drop now, honouring those that came before them 80 years ago. We're currently watching members of the UK Armed Forces drop down.
D-Day, D-Day.
Same sort of parachutes that we will have seen those paratroopers use back in June 1940.
It happened in World War III.
And what a glorious picture that is. What a glorious day in Normandy. These are the paratroopers from the 16 Air Assault Brigade. There you go, landing there on the grass.
Skibbity, 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 dob, bob, bob, bob. Yes, yes. Skibbity, skibbity, boo, boo.
Transport aircraft. Can you count how many there are, Tom, for us?
I wouldn't hasten to count them.
Normandy, Normandy.
Ah, yes.
And of course, this is all part of what is a two-day commemoration event, not only in Normandy, but across the Channel in Portsmouth as well. Remembering what happened 80 years ago this week.
I can't believe this day is happening.
Was liberated. First by those parachute drops of British and American service personnel, followed by those amphibious landings, the largest amphibious landings in the history of the world. 150,000 people crossing the Channel to retake Western Europe.
What a beautiful sight that is, those parachutes dropping down onto the grass there in Normandy. Of course, we have members of the royal family in Portsmouth today. Our reporters live in Normandy to watch this. Another plane coming over now. Will people drop out of there? I imagine they will.
And it is, of course, a day that unites people from all sides of the political spectrum. We can forget for a moment we were in a general election campaign. We saw in Portsmouth a little earlier both Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer standing almost next to one another. You'd be forgiven for forgetting they weren't debating yesterday, because it's moments like this where the country can come together, honour our armed forces, both currently serving, but also those who fell 80 years ago. But it's not just, of course, about those who fell and made the ultimate sacrifice. It's also about those who courageously fought on, and it was a remarkably successful operation. This isn't just a commemoration for those that fell, it's also a celebration of what was a tremendous moment in Allied and British military history.
Absolutely it is, and there we go, a close-up shot of two of those parachutes coming down to earth there. What a beautiful sight, and there you go, a crowd at the bottom cheering them on as they come into landing there. And we're going to be across all of these commemorations over the next 2 days. We've been there for the preparation. There they are, helping that man get out of his parachute. It's got a bit entangled, but there you go.
It said that these are different parachutes to what the paratroopers in the Royal Air Force are used to using. Of course, in today's day and age, we don't have the sort of canopy-style parachutes that were the only way to jump out of aeroplanes back in 1944. We're used to far different shapes, so this is a pretty faithful replication of how those paratroopers landed, and marking this moment for what is a pretty profound anniversary. We've been hearing all week from people who were there on those beaches 80 years ago, and it is remarkable to hear those stories. There are fewer and fewer veterans left from that time, and to be able to hear from them has been a true privilege.
Absolutely. Well, let's bring in our Home and Security Editor, Mark White. Mark, tell us a little bit more about what we're watching here.
Well, what you're seeing is really a tribute to those paratroopers who were involved in dropping into areas behind the beachhead. Effectively, what they were trying to do was to stop the reinforcement of those beaches by Germany. Now, some 18,000 Allied paratroopers were dropped just after midnight on the 6th of June 1944. And many of those paratroopers, as they came down into a nest of vipers, effectively German dugout positions that were shooting them down, some of them dead before they even hit the ground, and a key role as well as trying to stop Germans from reinforcing those beach areas was also to secure some of the bridges over key rivers along that area in Normandy as well, so that they could, of course, be then used for the Allied advancement. That also exacted a heavy toll on those paratroopers and commandos that were involved in those particular raids. Some dropped by parachute, others were in gliders that landed, some of the gliders smashing up as they came in, killing occupants on board. It was a terrible, bloody episode, not just on the beaches, the 5 beaches of Normandy where those troops were being landed by that mighty armada out in the English Channel, but of course that airborne assault as well. Some 14,000 Allied sorties were flown during that operation on D-Day in support of the ground troops. So it was a huge endeavour, not just by the maritime forces, but also the Royal Air Force. A huge endeavour which had taken place for many weeks and months before D-Day, as they tried to bomb the supply lines and weaken the German defences. And they had to play a game of subterfuge as well by bombing different locations further up the coast, so as not to give it away for the Germans that this was going to be the area that the eventual landings would take place. And that went on, as I say, for many weeks and months before D-Day itself, to try to degrade as much as possible the German army's potential to fight back and resist those advancing Allied forces.
Aeroplanes come across the channel now. We're looking from the ground in Normandy, expecting some more paratroopers to drop out, replicating what happened, Mark, as you say, in the very early hours of the 6th of June 1944. It should be said that on other parts of the coastline in northern France, to distract the Nazi occupying troops, dummy parachutists were dropped out to confuse the Germans' radar systems, to confuse them and distract them. And it's one of these extra examples of distraction, deception and espionage that the British were so good at. These pretend dummy parachute drops that the RAF engaged in, as well as the real ones. But I should say, we are looking at real ones right now.
Yeah,
Yep.
they were
How's it
pretty
going?
small. They were
Hello.
only about 1.5 feet tall. Anyone that's watched that incredible movie, The Longest Day, will have seen reference made to these dummy paratroopers who, as you say, were launched in their hundreds and thousands to try to deceive the enemy. And of course, at night, and as they landed, they let off firecrackers that gave the impression that this was indeed paratroopers opening fire. And it did. It worked for a while. It fooled the Germans and made them deploy and ensure that the resources were tied up in other areas before they eventually got wise to that. But, you know, all throughout that area, as I was saying, you had paratroopers who were landing in open fields, but of course many landing in villages in the area as well, landing on rooftops and getting stuck in trees, and of course coming down onto machine gun nests in the German dug-in positions, which must have been absolutely horrific for them as they came down trying and hoping that they would reach the ground unscathed. And as of course we know, many just didn't.
And Mark, just as we're watching this picture live from Normandy of these paratroopers jumping out of these aircraft into Normandy, can you tell us a little bit about what's been happening over in Portsmouth and what is scheduled for the rest of the day?
Yeah, well, we had a commemoration service here at Southsea in Portsmouth. A very moving ceremony indeed. We do these spectacles so well in the UK, and it truly was a memorable experience for everybody here, including, of course, about 20 veterans who were given a standing ovation at certain points. There was one veteran who came onto the stage, Ray Hayward, who was in a tank on D-Day and the weeks afterwards. His tank was actually struck, and he told of how he was so badly injured they had to amputate his legs below the knee. Absolutely incredible. He was still able to walk on to the stage despite the fact that not only is he now 99 years old, but of course he is a double amputee, and he got a standing ovation, and he spoke very movingly about those events, and he said he considered himself, despite those life-changing injuries, he considered himself to be one of the lucky ones, because so many thousands of his brother comrades just never came back from D-Day. And we also saw another very moving moment when Eric Bateman, another veteran, came onto the stage, and he was accompanied by two of his great-granddaughters who also spoke to pay tribute to their great-granddad. And that was a very emotional moment for here too. The King spoke, paid tribute to all of those who took part in the D-Day operations, both over in France but here in the UK, in support of that as well. His son, the Prince of Wales, gave a moving tribute, as did the Prime Minister. So many celebrities and VIPs that were here for that commemoration, and it was intertwined by some really beautiful reflective moments when we had music from that time, people dancing, reenacting the GIs that came over during the Second World War to dance with the young English women in towns and villages right across the country. It was a truly amazing event here that I'll certainly remember for a long time, and it was just incredible to see these veterans here still well represented, even though there are fewer than 100
interesting video
veterans now still alive in the UK.
Really, really remarkable stuff.
It was remarkable. I enjoyed it. Is there any more stuff about D-Day today, I wonder? I think that's probably about it from this video. I'm not too sure. So let's have a look. Put in D-Day. D-Day today. Alright. D-Day.
I'm Ethan Ware, and this is episode number 64, where we ask, how do we stay safe online?
Early this morning in Portsmouth, where once as young men they mustered in their tens of thousands, they set off again, nearly 80 years on. Barely a platoon strong in number today, they are among the very last of the D-Day veterans. Some are now over 100 years old. Ronald Hendry, at 98, is one of the youngest.
I was on the destroyer, and I was on big gun deck, and I was what was known as a cordite loader. It was literally deafening, and we were just about 2 hours and a quarter continuous firing, and the barrel of the gun, the first time I'd ever seen it melt, the paint on it blistered.
They were allies with a common purpose, the liberation of Europe.
They are about to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the Normandy landings. In the recovery of Europe from Hitler, it was a pivotal moment. But as the French coastlines, myriad war graves remind us, the sacrifice was vast. Jim Forbes was a 16-year-old cadet with the Merchant Navy.
He was 16, he was. And he spent his 17th birthday, sadly. Unfortunately, the two other ships got blown up in Le Havre, and he spent his 17th birthday pulling out dead bodies from Le Havre harbour.
As they headed for the English Channel, the Royal Navy, so central to D-Day's colossal endeavour, paid their tribute, as did the RAF. feeling about going back to Normandy this week?
Oh, I like the idea,
We first met Albert Kier 5 years ago on the 75th anniversary, dancing the night away on the ferry over. There were 250 veterans the Royal British Legion brought over then. Today, just 20. Don't know if you remember this, Albert, 5 years ago on the last trip.
This will be you dancing.
You remember that?
I do.
They couldn't get you off the dance floor, Albert, that night.
No, they couldn't. No. I used to love dancing.
Did you? How are you feeling about this week?
Fine. I think it was marvellous what they've done, isn't it? Yeah, look at the bands and everything terrific. I'm very, very impressed, aren't you? Yeah, very good. Really good.
Closer to France, they paused to remember those who never made it ashore, those killed off the coast, those who drowned trying to reach it. And your emotions at events like these?
I am a very emotive person, and I can drop a tear here and there, and I've no doubt when they have the service tomorrow, I should drop a little tear, yes. Yes. When you take pictures like you're doing now, you people, you're taking the pictures, and I'd like the people to see them and say, we don't want anything like that to happen to our sons and daughters again. While you're thinking of that, just remember the ones that are under the ground. They give everything for you.
And in the seaside towns and villages where D-Day signalled liberation from fascism, they prepare to commemorate again the men and women involved, wondering perhaps for how much longer they'll be able to take the hands of the last among us and thank them in person.
Wow, that was quite interesting. Really was.
Stella Artois Unfiltered.
Okay, adverts.
Beer au naturel.
Too many adverts in the world. Well, adverts, that's how they make the revenue for adverts, but
Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy.
This is Matthew Wilson of the CBC, where our assault formations are shown.
I don't know if you guys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, agree. Adverts just get in the way of films and stuff and computer games, but that's how they make the revenues.
Hundreds of veterans.
Well, I think I was quite scared.
Our team at the National has spent weeks combing archives to find rarely seen images and to bring you voices now silenced by age.
I can just shut my eyes and bring back the time.
The experiences of those who were there, now restored.
Most of us were violently ill.
In order to take you on a journey back to a critical moment when the fate of the free world hung in the balance. It is getting harder to keep history alive.
I feel very humble being here because I seem to represent most of the old soldiers now.
There are only 9,200 Canadian Second World War and Korean War veterans left alive to tell their stories. One of them, John Priest. He fought in Europe in 1945 and feels the burden of history.
There's only a few left, and I don't feel old, and I feel like all the other guys. And now I wish all my buddies were here.
But at last it started. The enormous bombing and shelling of the coast defenses. We came in from the sea that morning with a terrific volume of firepower.
D-Day, 5:10 a.m. The guns of the Royal Navy battleship HMS Warspite.
Hope you can hear the program okay.
The pivotal battle, the beginning of the end of Nazi Germany, was underway. Along the misty French coastline, 156,000 Allied soldiers prepared to rush an underwater gauntlet of mines and booby traps and to charge the German guns, fortifications, and barbed wire. They landed in daylight at 5 beaches, hours before Allied paratroopers had dropped behind enemy lines. The 3rd Canadian Infantry Division, 14,500 strong, went into Juno Beach with 5,000 assault troops and 2,500 in the initial waves. Those who were there remember the morning as cloudy, raw, and sullen. 6 a.m. The first wave of the Queen's Own Rifles piled into their assault boats. Hector Elliott, a lieutenant at the time, was with them. He spoke to CBC in 1984.
It was about a 2-mile run into the coast. And we spent those 2 hours bobbing up and down in these little boats, and we had seasick bags. So I suppose in a way it was a bit of a blessing because our minds were taken off the reality of landing on a beach by being ill, being very sick.
6:15 a.m. The assault boats begin their long, slow journey to the beach amid heavy seas. Captain Eddie Goodman of the Fort Garry Horse Regiment led a Sherman tank unit ashore. He spoke to CBC in 1994.
It was a mixed mood. Some people were exhilarated, quite a few. Some people were pensive and thoughtful about what they were going into.
8:02 a.m. The North Shore Regiment of New Brunswick landed at Saint-Aubin-sur-Mer, while at 8:05 a.m., just to the west, A and B companies of the Queen's Own Rifles touched the beach at Bernier-sur-Mer. Lance Corporal Rolf Jackson was with B Company when the ramps went down. He spoke to CBC in 1998.
I was hit and knocked off my feet. This would be within 15 feet of leaving the landing craft. And when I came up out of the water, there wasn't many of the section left. The section of 10 men, 7 of them were killed before they got out of the water.
In the skies over Normandy, Squadron Leader James Stocky Edwards, one of Canada's highest-scoring aces, was looking down from the cockpit of his Spitfire.
The water was very rough down there. They were putting people off in when it should be shallow and deep, and they're going underwater with the tanks and troops with their gear on. But other than that, there were lots of good things, and the landing was a success. But there were a lot of suffering from it.
8:05 a.m. Canadian troops reported being under intense fire, with the Germans lobbing 16 shells a minute onto Juno Beach. Major Charles Dalton was also with the Queen's Own Rifles and landed directly in front of a concrete bunker. He spoke to CBC in 1984.
The man on my right was hit 6 or 7 times in his left arm, and I was not hit. If I had been in his place or a little closer to him, then I would have got those bullets down the center. But I did not get hit until I got to the wall. I got all the way in. But everybody to my right was a casualty one way or another.
Almost half of Dalton's company was lost coming across the beach. The Queen's Own took the highest casualties of any Canadian unit on D-Day, 143 dead and wounded. In a fit of daring, a handful of Queen's Own made their way up the beach and around behind German defenders, driving them back from the shore. It was largely the same story all along the Canadian beachhead, with the Winnipeg Rifles, the Regina Rifles, and the North Shore Regiment of New Brunswick clawing their way forward with tanks and artillery supporting them. 9 a.m. Bernier-sur-Mer was cleared. Local residents who had been sheltering in their homes during the Allied bombardment and fighting were overjoyed. They showered the Canadians with food and apple brandy, known as Calvados. Along the Orne River and the Caen Canal, Canadian paratroopers fighting with the British 6th Airborne guarded the eastern flank of the invasion against a German counterattack. And despite being scattered all over the drop zone, the 1st Canadian Parachute Battalion cut the bridges at Verville and Robillon. Sergeant Merv Jones spoke to CBC in 1964 about the jitters of his nighttime jump.
Well, I tell you, I was quite scared. And I even asked the jump master at the specific time if we could change places. But we'd been so trained in this light business, red, don't go, green, go, that he says, oh, no, don't worry about it. We haven't got time to change you. That when the red green light did come on, automatic, due to my training, out I went.
11:45 a.m. As captured in this rare color footage shot on D-Day, the 3rd Division deployed its reserves, infantry, tanks, and artillery, in a second wave. It was the job of HMCS Algonquin and other Allied warships to keep up the bombardment on surviving German fortifications, some of which didn't surrender until late afternoon. Further out in the English Channel that day, Alex Polowin aboard HMCS Huron.
Now our job, like many people pointed out to me, well, you guys were lucky, you bombarded the coast and then you left. Nothing like that. You know, we were in the channel about 7 months. Our job was to protect the people that were going in for D-Day, their ships, their boats that were there. That was our job. To find the enemy ships that were doing that, they were coming down to do that. We prevented them.
The Navy's other job that day, to evacuate the wounded back to England. By the end of D-Day, Canadian casualties totaled 1,096, of whom 381 were killed in action and 574 wounded, a far cry from the 1,800 casualties Canadian military planners had expected. Noon on D-Day, German commanders on the ground had warned beforehand the invasion would have to be crushed on the beach. Hitler, believing Normandy to be a feint, refused to release his panzer divisions until late in the day. An advisor to German Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, Admiral Friedrich Rück, says by then it was too late. Rück spoke to CBC in 1984.
So he knew that the battle was lost.
When?
At once. As soon as a third front started forming.
5:30 p.m., the Germans counterattacked. Although bloodied, the Canadian lines held. It was a taste of what was to come. In the weeks that followed, Normandy turned into a killing ground. It took over 80 days for the Allies to break out and then sweep northeast through France, Belgium, Holland, and into Germany, helping to deliver a death blow to the Third Reich. By sunset on June 6th, Lance Corporal Rolf Jackson of the Queen's Own could look back at the beach and see the price of the victory to come.
I've watched my sergeant, a Jewish lad, Freddie Harris, first out of our craft, never got out of the water. Johnny Gibson, my corporal, never got out of the water. Fred Eamon, rifleman, never got out of the water. Ted Westerby, never got out of the water. John Kirkland, Boynton, neither one of them got out of the water. Doug Reed, my number 2 on the gun, never got out of the water. Al Kennedy, we got Brent Gunner, never got out of the water. Doug Reed's brother, the 2 of them are buried in 6 feet apart at Benny Samar at the cemetery. These are people these are only my guides, my tent.
80 years later, a final salute. John Priest makes sure to place his candle atop the gravestone of General Harry Crear, who led the Canadian Army during the campaign in Northwest Europe.
This is too much. It takes me back to the old days. I think all these guys here. Don't forget. Well, so many of them I knew.
Quite saddening sometimes, isn't it?
And many
when you think about it. War's not a good thing, but it's good for money. But you know, a lot of people get hurt in war. So when they're saying there's going to be a third new world war in the UK, well, UK eventually, in Russia may attack the UK, and people are worried about that. So it may happen. That's why they're going to get prepared with the nukes and stuff. If you're from the UK, like I am, it's going to be coming eventually in the next 10 years.
Quality and innovation are as important to
World War III.
On this Tuesday night from Juno Beach in France, Canadian veterans making a final journey.
I have friends here. Very dear. It's the last chance to say goodbye.
remembering the sacrifice and honoring those lost on D-Day 80 years ago. The future of refugees hoping for a new life in Europe.
Wonderschöne Zeit vor mich. It was a wonderful time for me. People were so happy to welcome us. I felt very much at home.
As European attitudes to immigration harden.
Back here in Canada, demanding answers. The mounting mystery after a damning report revealed some MPs participated in foreign meddling. And the ethics questions about this federal cabinet minister's business dealings. The text messages obtained in a global news investigation and his response.
Global National with Donna Friesen, reporting tonight from Juno Beach in France.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We are on Juno Beach in northern France to mark a remarkable moment. The beaches all along here on June 6, 80 years ago were a battleground. It was the largest air, naval, and land operation in history. The goal was to liberate Northwest Europe from Nazi domination and ultimately defeat Hitler. 150,000 Allied forces, including 14,000 Canadians, took part. And what they did changed the course of history. Hearing firsthand accounts from those who witnessed D-Day is increasingly rare. Those still alive are mostly 100 years old now or older. Exceptional not only that they are still with us, but that some made the trip here from Canada. They are back in Normandy 80 years after D-Day, not fighting fit anymore, but here to tell their stories and to say goodbye. William Wilson came from High River, Alberta. Why did you want to be here for this?
I have friends here. Very dear. Yeah. It's the last chance to say goodbye. Simple.
He joined the Navy at 18 and turns 100 in November. Others who hoped to be here never made it. I spoke with Bill Cameron in BC in March. He was 19 when he volunteered for the Navy and knew he'd be heading to war. What did your parents think?
Well, I guess they didn't think much of it. You don't look at the grim side of things.
He was on HMCS Kitchener, manning an anti-aircraft gun. For months, protecting ships crossing the North Atlantic.
That was hectic because the Germans were in the North Atlantic with their subs, and they were sinking as many ships as they could. And we were lucky we didn't get sunk.
And on D-Day, he was on the only Canadian corvette to take part in the invasion of Normandy, protecting American troops on Omaha Beach, which was bristling with German guns.
And our job was to shoot and protect these guys landing on the beach. And Omaha Beach was an awful beach. It was the worst one of them all. I was scared to death, the same as the rest of them. But I figured, hey, it's either them or us.
He shot down so many enemy planes, the French awarded him the Legion of Honor, the country's highest order of merit.
In case it's a little warmer, we can have this, you can wear this one.
Good idea, Donna.
Last week, Bill was packed and ready to go to Normandy. Sadly, 8 hours before he was set to leave, he suddenly passed away. He was 100 years old. His family gave us their blessing to tell his story. He will, his daughter said, be watching over Juno Beach, his voice, too, now fallen silent, along with all the Canadian soldiers who never made it home. 2,044 Canadians are buried at this cemetery in Normandy, including 19 who were never identified. "13 veterans from the Second World War were able to make the trip here, and some of them were at the opening of a new wing of the Juno Beach Center today. It showcases how Canada has developed since the Second World War. The center was built in 2003 to recognize and commemorate the sacrifices made by Canadians who were part of the Allied victory in the Second World War. Fundraising is underway to expand it even further. I'll be back from Normandy a little later with a look at how immigration is driving the political agenda here in Europe, potentially threatening the freedom Canadians and others fought and died for here. But first, Farah Nasser has the rest of the day's news. Farah.
Thank you, Donna. We turn now to the political fallout following those damning findings detailed in yesterday's NSICOP report. The Liberals are refusing to say which federal politicians wittingly cooperated with foreign interference schemes that included revealing secrets to foreign states. Mercedes Stephenson has been digging into the explosive report. Mercedes, why isn't the federal government releasing their names?
Farah, a day after the bombshell allegations, we still don't know who the parliamentarians are, the parties they belong to, which foreign countries they were allegedly helping, or whether they are members of parliament or senators. The Liberal government was asked several times today to identify the parliamentarians in question, but refused to do so.
I have a lot of confidence in CSIS and the RCMP to do the work that they're required to do under law.
Our government takes foreign interference very, very seriously.
Well, the Minister of Public Safety and the Deputy Prime Minister both mentioned the RCMP. There is no information from the government or the RCMP to indicate whether or not there are ongoing police investigations at this time. The report warned it would be very difficult to bring charges against those allegedly involved, owing to outdated laws on foreign interference in Canada. Meanwhile, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre did not ask a single question about the report during question period. Instead, it was the NDP and the Bloc Québécois demanding action.
I believe if there's any evidence that someone knowingly worked with a foreign government to influence our democracy, they should no longer be a member of parliament.
Farah, there are more questions than answers on which sitting parliamentarians may have been acting as domestic collaborators with foreign powers, and whether or not we'll know their identities before Canadians go to the polls.
Mercedes Stephenson in Ottawa. Thank you, Mercedes. First, it was London Drugs, a major Western Canadian pharmacy and retail chain. Then, Ticketmaster. In recent weeks, Canadians have had their data compromised by cyber criminals. Tonight, a warning from Canada's Auditor General that 3 key federal agencies, including the RCMP, are falling short when it comes to protecting Canadians from these threats.
We found that these organizations have neither the capacity nor the tools to effectively fight cybercrime.
The Auditor General's review found staffing shortages, lack of coordination, and ignorance on how to properly deal with cyber threats. In one instance, Canada's communications regulator, the CRTC, learned about a child exploitation incident. Instead of forwarding the information on to law enforcement, the agency asked the individual to report the incidents to police themselves. It's not known if that happened. And a big change tonight from Canada's telecom regulator. Online streaming services must now pay into a fund to help create Canadian content. The Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission is directing Netflix, Spotify and other streamers to put 5% of their annual Canadian revenue into the fund. It's expected to add about $200 million into the broadcast system every year to boost local, French language and Indigenous programs. So far, no comment from the streaming services. Canada's Ethics Commissioner says he is looking into the business dealings of Liberal Cabinet Minister Randy Boissonnault. The reverse course from Commissioner Conrad von Finkenstein follows Global News' reporting about the minister's ties to a lobbyist and medical supply company embroiled in lawsuits. Boissonnault says he's followed ethics and lobbying rules, but as Krista Hesse reports, new text messages obtained by Global News raises questions about the minister's potential involvement in a business deal a year after he was elected.
I have had no operational involvement in this company since I was elected.
Employment Minister Randy Boissonnault fielded questions from Ethics Committee members about his ties to a lobbyist and a medical supply company. The central question is whether Boissonnault broke ethics and lobbying rules by using his position in government to benefit his former business associates Kirsten Poon and Stephen Anderson, and whether the minister himself benefited. Global News revealed Boissonnault accepted payments from Poon, who lobbied a department where he was associate minister at the time. His office says those are very delayed payments from work completed in 2020 and 2021.
When was the last time you received money from her? There were no monies were received by any company that I'm responsible for from Ms. Poon in 2024.
Questions also focused on Global Health Imports, or GHI, a company Boissonnault co-founded in 2020 with Anderson while he was out of office. He was re-elected a year later and says he then resigned from GHI. But texts obtained by Global News raise questions as to whether Boissonnault may have discussed a business deal with Anderson while he was serving as a cabinet minister. Boissonnault denies the allegation. Malvina Gowie, owner of the Gowie Group, a PPE company, received texts from Anderson pushing for a deposit on a purchase. Anderson forwards her a text from a person he calls Randy, asking why it hasn't been sent yet and to be available in 15 for a partner call. 30 minutes later, Gowie got another message from Anderson saying he has spoken to Randy. In a statement, the Gowie Group said it has not had any direct communication with Boissonnault, but that Anderson had told Gowie Boissonnault was a partner in GHI and a public official. The Edmonton Centre MP owns a 50% stake in GHI, which is allowed as long as the public office holder doesn't manage or operate the business. Boissonnault's office denies he communicated with Anderson about the Gowie Group, saying he is not the Randy in the texts. The Gowie Group has filed a lawsuit alleging Anderson has stolen the nearly $500,000 deposit and committed fraud. Boissonnault is not named in that lawsuit, and Anderson denies the claim. Anderson said another Randy works at GHI, but would not disclose the employee's full name. Global News was unable to verify any details related to a second employee named Randy. Farah?
Krista Hesse in Toronto. Thank you, Krista. A First Nation in northwestern Ontario is suing the provincial and federal governments over mercury poisoning. Grassy Narrows First Nation has been plagued with mercury poisoning since the 1960s. It alleges the governments allowed the river system to be contaminated by a paper mill upstream, then failed to clean up the toxic waste. And now a new study from Western University says the mercury contamination has been made worse by ongoing industrial pollution from the mill.
There's a new generation of young people that are being born every day.
Wow. Don't know what to say about that.
You know, being born to a contaminated river with contaminated fish. Our economy's been destroyed. Our way of life has been destroyed.
Contaminated fish.
Mercury is harmful to people who eat contaminated fish or drink the water. The lawsuit is seeking protection for the nearby river and Grassy Narrows territory, and for industrial land use in, on, or near the territory to be prohibited if it infringes on treaty rights. America's president uses his executive authority. Coming up, what Joe Biden will do if too many people try to illegally cross the U.S.-Mexico border.
Oh, Yachty's report for training. Yes, incoming.
And then he removed a triangle. Can you hurry up? It was all very stressful for me.
Watch all seasons and spin-offs of Below Deck on Hayu.
We're tired of being told to just eat less and move more.
Introducing Juniper, the medical way to live.
In the U.S., President Joe Biden announced sweeping new measures to temporarily close America's border with Mexico to migrants, which suspends protection for asylum seekers. The White House has been under intense pressure from Republicans and some Democrats to reduce the number of people crossing the southern border illegally. Jackson Prosco reports.
Facing a crisis of human migration at the southern border, U.S. President Joe Biden announced a sweeping executive order, aiming to stem the flow of millions of asylum seekers.
This ban will remain in place until the number of people trying to enter illegally is reduced to a level that our system can effectively manage.
The president's plan only targets people who cross into the U.S. illegally, denying them the right to claim asylum and deporting them. The asylum shutdown is triggered whenever more than 2,500 people per day illegally enter. Right now, it's nearly double that.
If the United States doesn't secure our border, there's no limit to the number of people who may try to come here.
The surge in illegal migration has been driven by political instability in Latin America, while a backlog in U.S. immigration courts has become a beacon for the desperate.
You make an asylum claim and you're pretty much guaranteed 3, 4, 5, 6 years of living in this country lawfully while you wait for that hearing.
A bipartisan group of lawmakers tried to pass similar border legislation
Keeping
earlier
cool,
this
man.
year.
Keeping cool.
It fell apart after Republicans walked away
Cool air,
from
cool
the urging
air.
of former President Donald Trump.
What the White House is doing today is they're just playing a political game.
The White House insists it will not deport unaccompanied children, but progressives see Biden's policy as a throwback to the Trump era.
We were told that President Biden would be restoring humanity at our border.
In an election year, with immigration a top concern, The White House insists it had no choice but to take drastic action to slow the tide of humanity flowing north. Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
The Israeli military has launched a ground offensive into central Gaza's Burej refugee camp and says troops are being backed by airstrikes. According to local hospital officials, one strike that hit the camp killed at least 11 Palestinians, including 3 children and a woman. A statement from Israel's military says it's targeting Hamas positions. The incursion's happening as international mediators wait for Israel and Hamas to respond to a new ceasefire proposal. Modi's majority in doubt ahead how India's prime minister will likely need allies to secure another term. The scale of Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's victory is nowhere near what he wanted. If Modi is to form government for a 3rd term, he will have to rely on coalition partners. Redmond Shannon reports.
Celebrating victory, but not the type he had hoped for. This is a win for the world's largest democracy, says Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, notably referencing his alliance of parties along with his own BJP party. In India's previous 2 elections, Modi's BJP alone won enough seats for a majority. This time, he will fall short and needs the support of allied parties to govern.
इंडिया गठबंधन की मीटिंग है.
Prominent opposition leader Rahul Gandhi says he's not conceding just yet, waiting to see if his alliance could somehow cobble together a majority.
I think there are inducements in terms of high positions which are going in the direction of these parties, sort of kingmaker type parties, from both of the major political parties.
During the campaign, Hindu nationalist Modi said an opposition vote would amount to a jihadi vote. He wanted his alliance to win a supermajority necessary to push through constitutional changes feared by minority groups. Those among the reasons fewer voters opted for Modi, according to political analyst Subir Sinha.
They felt that they were being taken for fools, and that the real issues were being sidetracked, and just the relentless Hindu-Muslim polarization.
If Modi does secure a 3rd term, he will be just the 2nd Indian leader to do so since independence. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
Next, the percentage of Germans wanting their country to take a tougher line on immigration. You're looking at Juno Beach in Normandy, France. Global National is back in a moment.
"80 years ago on these beaches in northern France, the fate of Europe was hanging in the balance. Canadian forces alongside our allies fought and died here to defeat the tyranny and racial hatred of the Nazis' barbarous regime. Now the far right is on the rise again. Nationalist parties have won elections in Italy, Hungary, the Netherlands, lead the polls in France, Austria, and Belgium, and have a stake in governments in Finland and Slovakia. And polls in Germany, where I was last week, show 1 in 5 people now support the far-right AfD party, and immigration is the big driver.
After I go to university.
Anas Modamani's extraordinary story is a tale of how Germany has changed and how this one selfie changed his life. He fled the war in Syria and arrived in Germany at age 17.
It was a wonderful time for me. People were so happy to welcome us. I felt very much at home.
That was 2015. Germany's Angela Merkel famously welcomed more than 1 million refugees that year, mostly Syrians. In 2022, the EU accepted 5.1 million immigrants, and Germany has taken in more than any country in Europe. So many, Berlin's enormous Tempelhof airport, where Hitler held huge rallies and which later became a lifeline for West Berlin during the Cold War, was turned into a shelter to house them. Meant to be temporary, 9 years later, 1,500 people from 20 countries still live here.
I want to change my life.
Hassan Sisi arrived 4 months ago from Sierra Leone. He shares this shipping container with 3 other men.
And what do you hope to find in Germany?
Yeah, it's opportunity, and I know I will make it in life.
It won't be easy. The mood has hardened. Immigration is a huge economic pressure, and recent polling shows 86% of Germans are worried about it. Far-right groups such as Generation Identity are seizing on that.
Komplexere Geschichte. Wir haben in Deutschland.
We have in Germany and in Europe a migration crisis.
Their solution? Remigration, forcing people to go back where they came from and not allowing others in. They hired this boat in the Mediterranean. Their message, especially to migrants from the Middle East and Africa, you will not make Europe home. They believe no one who gets to Germany by passing through another country should be allowed to stay. So that would mean Germany would have no refugees then, because Germany's not connected to any of those countries in the Middle East.
Exactly what we say, yeah.
Anti-immigrant parties like Germany's AfD could win as many as a quarter of the seats in this week's elections for European Parliament. Among its slogans, Save the World? Let's start with Germany.
Before you invite someone over for dinner, you have to first make sure you have a full fridge.
And the guy who took that happy selfie with Angela Merkel, it made him the most recognizable refugee in Germany, which turned him into a target of the far right. Fake stories and doctored photos were posted linking him to terrorist attacks. For a time, he was afraid to be seen on the street.
I have lived with racism and hatred. I know what it feels like.
He's a German citizen now with a good job, grateful for his new life, but well aware it would be much harder if he were arriving in Europe today. That is Global National for this Tuesday from Juno Beach in Normandy, France. People here have not forgotten what Canadian troops did for them. Even 80 years later, they pay tribute. These pipers are marching past Maison de Canadienne, the first house to be liberated by Canadian troops on Juno Beach. The significance, the sacrifice of helping bring peace to Western Europe is not lost on people here. We are very grateful to Canadians, this man tells me, who came from far away to rid us of the Nazis. We thank them. I'm Donna Friesen. Thanks for watching. We will be back from Normandy tomorrow.
Well, that was interesting news, wasn't it? There's always something to put on the TV, or sometimes you can't find anything to put on, but you get there eventually.
Just book my flights for summer to Bali.
More adverts again.
Book your appointments online to get up-to-date vaccinations and advice at your local Boots store. I love how Boots make it easy, so whilst you're there you can stock up on your travel essentials like first aid kits, travel bans, insect repellent, whatever the trip, Boots is with you for getting holiday ready.
Let's spring like we've never sprung before. Dobbies, spring's our thing.
Their Majesties, the King and Queen.
Ladies and gentlemen, 80 years ago today, Field Marshal Montgomery, Commander-in-Chief of the Allied Ground Forces, wrote in his message to all soldiers on the eve of D-Day, "To us is given the honor of striking a blow for freedom, which will live in history. And in the better days that lie ahead, men will speak with pride of our doings." Today we come together to honor those nearly 160,000 British, Commonwealth and Allied troops who, on the 5th of June 1944, assembled here and along these shores to embark on the mission which would strike that blow for freedom and be recorded as the greatest amphibious operation in history. Those who gathered here in Portsmouth would never forget the sight. It was by far the largest military fleet the world has ever known. Yet all knew that both victory and failure were
King
possible,
Charles, Camilla on the side.
and none could know their fate. Aircrew flying overhead, sailors manning warships, or troops in assault craft battering their way through the stormy swell to the shore, whether dropping by parachute, landing in a wooden glider, or taking that terrible leap of faith onto the beaches. All must have questioned whether they would survive and how they would respond when faced with such mortal danger. The poet Keith Douglas, who was killed in action 3 days later, wrote of the embarkation. Actors waiting in the wings of Europe, we already watch the lights on the stage and listen to the colossal overture begin. For us, entering at the height of the din, it will be hard to hear our thoughts, hard to gauge how much our conduct owes to fear or fury. At this remove, 8 decades later, it is a near impossible task to imagine the emotion of that day. The pride of being part of so great an enterprise, the anxiety of in some way not coming up to scratch, and the fear of that day being their last. I recently myself spoke to veterans who, to this day, remember with such heartbreaking clarity the sight of those many soldiers lying on the beach who drowned before they could even engage in combat. The stories of courage, resilience, and solidarity, which we have heard today and throughout our lives, cannot fail to move us, to inspire us, and to remind us of what we owe to that great wartime generation, now tragically dwindling to so few. It is our privilege to hear their testimony, but our role is not purely passive. It is our duty to ensure that we and future generations do not forget their service and their sacrifice in replacing tyranny with freedom. Our rights and the liberty won at such terrible cost bring with them responsibilities to others in the exercise of that liberty. The Allied actions of that day ensured the forces of freedom secured first a toehold in Normandy, then liberated France, and ultimately the whole of Europe from the stranglehold of a brutal totalitarianism. And as we remember with humility, pride, and gratitude, let us never forget that the soldiers who fought in the campaign launched from this place came from 30 nations, from across the United Kingdom, the Commonwealth, and allied countries, while elsewhere in Europe, Allied forces continued to make vital progress in their successful Italian campaign. And while halfway around the world, at that same moment, the critical battles of Imphal and Kohima raged on in what was then Burma. The 1944 Victoria Cross Roll of Honor includes Sikh, Muslim, and Hindu soldiers. A reminder that events that year shaped our world then and the society we share today. While it was the frontline troops who faced the greatest personal dangers, the privations and sacrifices of war were endured by so many more The Allied victory was a truly collective effort, born of the fortitude and hard work of those who remained on the home front, toiling in factories, under our land in the mines, out in the fields, or working in secret, men and women alike. Their collective industry, ingenuity, and commitment helped our soldiers, sailors, and airmen to prevail. So, as we give thanks for all those who gave so much to win the victory, whose fruits we still enjoy to this day, let us once again commit ourselves always to remember, cherish, and honor those who served that day, and to live up to the freedom they died for by balancing rights with civic responsibilities to our country. For we are all eternally in their debt.
Wow, that was good, that was. I enjoyed that. Anyway, thank you for all joining me in the video, and I'll catch you in the next one. Hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll be back again soon. Take it easy, peace. And thanks for liking the video. Peace.